Thank you, Salwa. It is my honor and privilege to introduce to you Dr. Pedro Noguera. Dr. Noguera is the Distinguished Professor of Education at the Graduate School of Education and Information Studies at UCLA. His research focuses on the ways in which schools are influenced by social and economic conditions, as well as by demographic trends in local, regional, and global contexts. He is the author of 12 books and over 200 articles and monographs. He serves on the boards of numerous national and local organizations and appears as a regular commentator on educational issues on CNN, MSNBC, National Public Radio, and other national news outlets. Prior to joining the faculty at UCLA, he served as a tenured professor and holder of endowed chairs at NYU, Harvard University, and the University of California, Berkeley. From 2009 to 2012, he served as a trustee for the State University of New York as an appointee of the governor. In 2014, he was elected to the National Academy of Education. Dr. Noguera recently received awards from the Center for the Advanced Study of the Behavioral Sciences, from the National Association of Secondary Principals, and from the McSilver Institute at NYU for his research and advocacy efforts aimed at fighting poverty. I could literally go on and on and on, but I am so looking forward to hearing Dr. Pedro Noguera. And with that, welcome to Nevada.
Good morning. It's really a pleasure to be here in Reno with you, and I want to thank you for the invitation, the opportunity to address leaders from across the state. Beautiful state. I've only visited a couple times, mostly coming from the California side when we would come to Lake Tahoe. It was beautiful flying in this morning and seeing the mountains and the lakes. I guess we wish we had a little bit more snow up there, but especially down in LA where we haven't had rain for a while. But it's great to be with you. So I want to use my time to build up on a theme that you heard Superintendent Davis raise already about the equity moment that we're in. I think all of us know that even as our economy grows, the disparities grow too. The inequality in our country is as great as it's ever been, and that threatens our future. It threatens our future because when people are left behind, when we have large numbers of people not able to take advantage and participate in the prosperity of the country, resentment grows, desperation grows, and the problems we face as a nation become more difficult to solve. Education is implicated in many of the problems we face, from poverty to crime to teen pregnancy. We can go on, but it's also implicated in the solutions. The question is, how do we use education as a means to transform lives, to break the cycle of poverty, to enable more people to participate fully in the opportunities that exist in this country? We know it takes more than a good slogan. We've had good slogans in education, haven't we? No Child Left Behind was a great slogan, and we still left lots and lots of kids behind. I was talking to Marian Wright Edelman, the founder and CEO of the Children's Defense Fund, who actually came up with the slogan, Leave No Child Behind. I said, what do you think about the fact that that ended up becoming the law of the land? She said, well, I wish they had understood that when we used the term leave no child behind, it didn't mean test the kids as frequently as possible. We had something else in mind. So that's what I want to talk about today, the something else. Because what we've known now is if we simply do more of what we've been doing, we're not going to get much of a change. And what we've been doing for the last several years is we've been focused narrowly on test scores and counting the gaps in achievement and completely overlooked the opportunity to learn. What's driving the achievement gaps, what's driving the disparities in education are gaps in opportunity. If you don't close those gaps in opportunity, nothing changes. Testing is important, but teaching is even more important. And if we don't use testing as a tool to gauge what a child has learned, but instead use it merely to rank children and teachers and schools, then it's unlikely we're going to see any change at all. We have used pressure as a strategy for improving schools. Threats. I see absolutely no evidence that this will ever work. Every urban district in New Jersey is under state control. Some of them for many years, like Newark and Camden. No improvement, despite the fact that the governor is ostensibly in charge. It takes more than threats and pressure to get schools to improve. If we were to look at the highest performing urban district in North America, and unfortunately to do that we have to leave the country, we have to go to Toronto, we would find that they don't use pressure and threats to improve. They use what they call capacity building. That is, when a school's not performing, they don't threaten to fire the principal, they come and they offer help. And they look at data and say, it looks like you need help in math. We're going to send people who actually know math to work with your teachers. What they found is that when you build capacity and it's based on trust, schools can in fact get better over time. And when equity is driving the agenda, what you also find is outcomes cease to become predictable based on race and income and language and culture. And that's what we're after. And so I want to acknowledge that shifting toward equity is hard. It's hard, first of all, because many of us who've been doing this work haven't been focused on equity. And so it requires a shift in our focus and attention. We have grown accustomed in some schools to the idea that certain kids, based on their backgrounds, will always do better than other kids. And if that's the prevailing sentiment in your school, where achievement patterns are predictable, what often happens with that is complacency. People cease to believe it's their job. And they're much more likely to blame the parents, or the teachers, or the board, or the governor, or global warming, or too much junk food. People will blame all kinds of things, won't they? Whenever I go to a school where they're blaming someone else for why kids are not performing, I know they're focused on the wrong thing. Because the schools that are not are taking responsibility for how to change the conditions that allow good teaching and learning to be supported. What's the conversation like in your schools? It is a conversation of blame or of responsibility. Do we see equity as being at odds with the pursuit of excellence? There's a reason why we titled the book, Excellence Through Equity. Because we believe, and there is actually proof, that with the right strategies, we can cultivate excellence in all kinds of kids. Kids from trailer parks, kids from single-parent households. How many of you come from a family where neither parent graduated from college? Raise your hand. Lots of hands. How many come from a family where neither parent graduated from high school? Still some hands, mine too. Neither parent graduated from high school. They sent all 6 of us to college. Harvard, Brown, Cornell, 2 at Berkeley. Living proof. Your background should not determine what you can accomplish in education. Now ask yourself, when you look around your school, can you predict which kids are going to be in special ed? Which kids are going to be in the remedial classes? Can you just look in there and say, yeah, I knew that was the class for the kids who failed 9th grade math? Is it the backgrounds of the kids that's driving outcomes, or the capacity of your school? This is a critical question. If we're going to change outcomes and not be lapse into just another set of slogans. We have to do this work with political pressure, with economic constraints. We already heard poverty rates are rising, demographics are changing. So I don't want to pretend that work is easy. I do want to say it can be done. And I'm going to give you examples today of places that are getting it done and showing us that equity can, in fact, be much more than simply a slogan. What is equity? Equity is about recognizing, quite simply, that you've got to meet the needs of a child in order to give them the opportunity to be successful. And those needs are not simply academic, they also have to do with the non-academic needs children bring. If it's cold outside, some kids need a coat. Some kids need a hug. Some kids need a meal because they didn't get one the night before. Some of our kids don't have a stable place to live. Maybe haven't taken a bath in a few days. Hard to go to school when you smell bad or like urine. School I work with in the Bronx, the principal, Ramon Gonzalez, leading an excellent middle school in one of the poorest communities in the United States, knows every single one of his students, had one who was showing up regularly who smelled like urine. Other kids were teasing him. He called him in to try to figure out why, what's going on, are you peeing yourself, what's happening here? Then he found out he slept with two little brothers who always peed the bed. No time to take a shower in the morning. So what did he do? Couldn't change what was happening at home. He could make sure that he could get a shower and fresh set of clothes when he got to school. When we have an equity agenda, we see the whole child, don't we? And we recognize that their social and their emotional needs impact their academic needs. But anybody here who has children at home already practices equity, don't we? How many of you have more than one child? You're all equity experts. I have 5, so I'm definitely an expert. Because when you have more than one child, you know they're all different, aren't they? Even identical twins are different. Different needs, different strengths, different challenges. When my 3rd and 4th used to go to school together, I used to hold their hands. I would hold the 3rd one's hand longer, even though he was older. Not because I loved him more, but because he was shy. He'd want to hold on. His sister was ready to go, off to play. Parents do that, don't we? We understand how our kids are different. This one needs this kind of attention. This one needs this kind of an opportunity. Well, the kids in our schools are different too. And equity is not about ignoring the differences, it is about understanding them. Not about making excuses for them. But it's simply about recognizing that we've got to be clear about who these kids are, what their needs are, how they learn when they're not with us. Because the more we know about who we serve, the more we'll know about how to serve them. What do you really know about the children you serve now? You were just taken through an exercise and asked to visualize them. We have to be able to see beyond what color they are or what family they come from, because that tells you nothing about their personality, nothing about their interest, nothing about how they learn. Talking to a group of principals in Australia last year. I was making this point that you have to know the children. Principal of one of the most difficult schools in the country raised his hand. He said, my school's struggling. We've been struggling. We're in the outback. Have trouble keeping teachers. No one wants to live in a remote area. Have some of the lowest scores in the country. And I've been at a loss of what to do. And one day, a group of boys from my school came to me and asked me if I'd like to go fishing over the weekend. And since I fish, I said, sure, I'd like to go. So I came out there with them, and I had my brand new fishing rod. Spent hundreds of dollars on it. They were there with just twine and paper clips, out fishing me. Finally, I put my rod down, and they showed me how to use the twine and explained to me how they catch so much fish. And then I realized and had a revelation. How did these kids learn to fish in the first place? It wasn't through direct instruction. These are kids that learn by doing. These are kids that learn through modeling. These are kids that have to be actively engaged to learn things. How do your kids? I would say in too many schools, we expect the kids to learn the way we teach. And if they can't do it, you can't hear me. Even Shift in microphone. Is it on? Can you hear me now? No. No? Maybe? We have to teach them the way they learn. I'm going to come back to that in a moment because teaching kids the way they learn looks a lot different than what most of our classrooms look like now. So equity has to show up in that way too. In how we organize our schools, how we organize our classrooms, how we work with families and parents. We know there are obstacles. There are obstacles that are outside of school, the political obstacles, the policy obstacles, but there are a lot of obstacles inside of schools too. Here's a common one. In most schools, we intentionally assign our best teachers to teach our most advanced kids, and our weakest teachers to teach the kids with the greatest needs. In fact, I was teaching our brand new science and math teachers at UCLA last quarter, and I said, you know, you guys are great, but I have to warn you, you're going to go into schools where they're going to set you up to work with the most challenging kids. Why? Because that's how we do it in education. We don't do it like that in other fields. We don't take inexperienced pilots and say, you fly the most difficult routes. Right? We don't take a brand new electrician and say, you go wire that building that no one's ever touched in years, or we don't do that with doctors, but in education we do it. That's a basic equity issue. Here's what they did in Fontana High School. Fontana's not that far from here, down in Southern California, also in a dusty area of the state. 4,000 kids, all Latino, highest AP calculus scores in their county. I asked this superintendent, how do you get such high AP calculus scores? He said, because we have a great calculus teacher. And I got him to start teaching 2 sections of 9th grade math. So I go to meet the teacher, and I said, why are you teaching 2 sections of 9th grade math? He said, because until I did, we only had 6 or 7 kids in calculus. He said, now our classes are full because they built the road to calculus. When you assign your weakest teachers to teach 9th grade math, what's going to happen in 12th grade? You set them up. And so equity shows up on the basic things. Shows up all the time in discipline. Which kids do we punish the most? The kids with the greatest needs. They always did something wrong. I'm not going to pretend that there aren't kids out there who misbehave, don't misbehave. But we respond to the behavior, not the cause of the behavior problem. What does it look like when you respond to the cause? It means we start by asking some questions. How many of you have seen kids that will act out at reading time because they can't read? They want to get sent to the office, don't they? If there's no reading specialist waiting from the office, what happens? They end up further and further behind. When we respond to the cause, it doesn't mean we make excuses for bad behavior. It means we address the cause to the degree that we can. If we know a child is acting out because they're abused and neglected at home, we may not be able to solve the problem at home, but maybe we need to get that child a counselor. Maybe we need to get a social worker working with the family. Simply sending the child home is not a solution. And so equity forces us to adopt a more thoughtful, a more adaptive approach to leadership. Because business as usual has gotten us to where we are. As I said, the biggest challenge to change is complacency. It's the belief that we can't do it or they can't do it. And so how do we change the beliefs? How do we challenge our colleagues respectfully so that they push themselves? So they don't lapse into thinking that they're powerless and the kids are helpless. And so part of it means that we need a coherent strategy. We need clear goals. And that sounds obvious, but I would say that a lot of schools that I visit don't have clear, measurable goals for what they're trying to accomplish. And therefore, how can you know if you're making progress if there's no connection between what you're doing now and where you're trying to go? What's the theory of change that's guiding your actions? Is everybody on the same page, working for the same goals? Great schools are greater than the sum of their parts. They achieve more because everybody on the team is working together. And I don't just mean the teachers, I mean the receptionist, the custodian. Everyone is working together for a common set of objectives. When we're building capacity in schools, it shows up in mentoring. It shows up in classroom walks. How many of you have classroom walks going on? Giving teachers a chance to observe each other. Why is that important? Because the biggest obstacle to improving teaching is the isolation of our teachers. How many of you have been in schools where there's excellent teachers right next door to mediocre teachers? What we don't know how to do is help the one who is struggling to learn from the one who is highly effective. And pressure is not going to change that. Modeling lessons. Giving the person a chance to observe, giving us a chance to debrief together about what we've seen and how that teacher manages to pull off a classroom where kids are totally engaged. That's what changes outcomes. That's what improves the climate for teaching and learning. And so we have to make sure that we are focused on the right things in our schools. It's so easy to get distracted, especially when you're a school leader, because you have so many things on your agenda. I remember one school I used to work with would always come and find the principal in the storage room where the textbooks were. He'd be there counting textbooks and organizing the books. And I said, "Larry, why are you always in the storage room?" He said, literally, the school was in chaos, but he was there in the storage room organizing the books. He said, "You know, the only thing I can really control in this school is this storage room. No one listens to me here, so I'm going to get these books together." He focused. He worked hard, but he didn't work effectively. So how do we make sure we're working on the things that matter most? How do we create an environment where there's mutual accountability, where everyone is clear on what they've got to do? And that includes the kids themselves, doesn't it? Because if the kids aren't accountable, then we're not going to see any change. What's your strategy for getting your kids to care about learning? For getting your kids motivated? I ask that often when I visit schools, and people look at me like they're dumbfounded. So the strategy for getting kids motivated? One principal told me, failure. That's our strategy. We threaten them that if they don't do the work, they'll fail. Failure is not an effective motivator for some kids, is it? Especially kids who've known failure. Failure is a friend. Failure is someone they know well. I was visiting another high school. Principal explained they don't use failure as a threat. He said, we motivate kids with hope. We motivate kids by showing them that they can use their education to help themselves and their families. And we bring in examples of people that are doing that right now, because our kids feel close to their families. So what's your strategy? Research says there are 5 essential ingredients that must be in place for schools to improve. Research was done by the Chicago Consortium on School Improvement. They studied reform, not just in Illinois, but around the country. They wanted to know all these schools are reforming, changing curriculum, bringing in new technology, new forms of teaching. Which schools have gotten better? And among those that have gotten better, what do they share in common? And so these are the 5 essential ingredients, the 5 ingredients that all those schools that have experienced sustained improvement have gotten in common. First, they have a coherent instructional guidance system. What does that mean? It means teachers are clear on what they're teaching, and they're also clear on what to do when kids aren't learning it. It means that teachers plan together, because you can't get coherence if teachers are working in isolation. And it means that teachers work collaboratively. Second, ongoing development of the professional capacity of the staff. Why? Because universities don't produce master teachers. We have great teachers coming out of UCLA, great novices. They're not master teachers. Where do master teachers come from? They come from experience. But too often it's trial and error. Too often it's the isolation. And guess what? seniority is no guarantee that you will become a master, is it? Not at all. Teaching is art and skill. I always compare it to the martial arts. You don't get a black belt just because you've been studying for many years. You actually have to get better. Who are your black belt teachers? Who are your teachers that have mastered the craft? Because here's the work. The skills of your staff have to match the needs of your kids. If there's no alignment between the needs of the kids and the skills of the staff, you will see kids not performing. And so your data is telling you what your professional development needs to focus on. If the kids can't read, it means your teachers can't teach reading. If the kids can't do science and physics, that means the teachers don't know how to teach science and physics to them. Now, knowing that is not the same as knowing what to do about it. And so we talk about ongoing professional capacity building. It also forces us to recognize that in the same way the students are different, the teachers are different too. They're not all the same. Some are strong in content, weak in pedagogy. Some are pretty good in pedagogy, but have poor relationships with kids. You need all three to be effective. You have to have strong content knowledge, strong pedagogical skill, and you have to know how to build relationships. What do your teachers know? And what are you doing to develop that capacity in the staff? Third, strong parent-community ties. That's what the research shows. Over 50% of student achievement is influenced by what parents do. And that's not just income and education, though those are strong predictors. It's about whether or not parents make sure the kids get the work done, get to school on time, stay involved in their kids' lives. What are you doing to build trust with parents? What are you doing to build a partnership with parents? Your parents can either be your best ally or your biggest problem. You have to make them your ally. Because we know, as the research shows, when there's reinforcement at home for what's happening in school, performance goes up. And you already have the data to prove it. Ask yourself, how many of your high-achieving kids have no parental support? And then ask the same question of the underachievers. How many of them have parent support? And so getting parents involved, getting the community involved if necessary, is one of those essential ingredients. A student-centered learning climate or culture, an essential ingredient. Why? Because relationships, values, norms, attitudes, beliefs, this is the stuff that makes up a great school. Seymour Saracen, psychologist at Yale University, wrote a book, The Culture of School and the Problem of Change. He did it to explain why it was, following the Russian launch of Sputnik, when we launched a number of reforms to catch the Russians in space, why it was that many of the reforms hadn't worked. He says, because we approach reform as though we're following a cookbook and a recipe. We think we just mix in the right ingredients, we just adopt a curriculum they use someplace else, that we too will get better results. What we completely ignored was the need to change culture, the need to adapt what we do to our circumstances. Well, here's what we know. If culture doesn't change, nothing changes. You could bring in new technology. If you don't change the culture, nothing changes. And cultures can't be imposed on schools either. They develop through relationships. Hopefully, they develop around a shared vision. Challenge is you already have a culture. What's your culture like? Is it a culture that makes people want to work together? Is it a culture that instills a sense of pride in the children? What is your culture like? If you're curious, ask a friend to visit. Ask them, how were they treated by the receptionist? What was it like when they walked through the halls? When they went into the teacher's lounge, what were the teachers talking about? They could be your spy for the day. How about in the playground, in the cafeteria? What was the culture like? How do the kids conduct themselves? The morale of your teachers is a reflection of your culture. And I've never seen a high-performing school with low morale. where teachers feel beaten down, where they're running out the door faster than the kids at the end of the day. I have seen schools where on their own, teachers will call parents. On their own, they'll tutor kids. On their own, they'll come in to make their classrooms look beautiful and stimulating. They do that because they realize they're part of a team and achieving a higher purpose. That's about culture too. Fifth, always comes down to leadership. Shared leadership. Because it's not just about what you do as a principal, it's about what you do to empower others around you. Because you can't be everywhere. You know what the sign of a great principal is? School doesn't fall apart when you're not there. Because people know what they're doing. They understand how things get done. There's trust. And there's a shared understanding of the work and its importance. You don't have to go to the PLC meetings because you know there are people there who will keep people on task, keep the conversation focused, because that shared vision is operating in the school. And so this is what the research shows. When you get these 5, now challenge, you got to get all 5. Right. Reflect now and ask, how are we doing on those 5? Where are we strong? Where are we not so strong? Because that will give you a clear sense of where the work needs to focus. I think that if we use research like this and we learn from examples like this, the one I'm going to describe now, we would end up doing things very differently than we do in most schools. Brockton High School is the largest high school in the state of Massachusetts, with 4,100 kids. It is one of 2 urban schools that gets a level 1 rating by the state. All the other level 1 rated schools are in affluent suburbs, mostly surrounding Boston. Brockton is in a working class, depressed community, a kind of deindustrialized town, known for crime and homelessness and fighting. That's what they're known for in Brockton. Rocky Marciano came from Brockton. They're the boxers. They got a statue of a boxer out front. Marvin Hagler, the middleweight champ, came from Brockton. If you check, there was a big fight at their last graduation, teachers, kids fighting in the stands. But they're also now known for writing. Because in 1998, when Massachusetts was about to implement their high-stakes exams, and in Massachusetts, if you don't pass the state exam, you don't get a diploma. And Massachusetts is the top-performing state in the country. A group of veteran teachers went to the principal and said, we've got to do something. The Boston Globe had called Brockton a cesspool. Said it was the worst school in the state. There had been all kinds of scandals, and the projection was that 75% of the kids would fail the exam. So rather than simply crying about being called a cesspool, they went to the principal and said, we've got to do something about this to get these kids ready for this exam. And the only way we can do it is if every teacher becomes a teacher of literacy. Because kids are coming to high school, reading at a 3rd and 4th grade level, and they can't do the math, they can't do the science, it's all literacy-based. Large numbers of kids, English learners, recent immigrants. Principal Sue Satchwitz says, good idea, but I can't make the teachers do it. Say, you don't have to make them. We'll work with those who are willing first. Say, but I can't pay you. Say, you don't have to pay us, because we know this is the work we need to do. So they started in 1998. Teachers teaching teachers. How to teach literacy and content. By 2002, when the first exam was given, 50% of the kids passed. That was seen as a sign of progress. So they said, let's stick with it. By 2006, 80% of the kids passed. Since 2010, over 90% of the kids passed the state exam. And over 1/3, and those are the kids featured in that picture, get the highest possible score. That gets them a free scholarship to any public university in the state. They didn't change the kids. Still have a school serving a low-income population with lots of challenges. They didn't sit around blaming the middle schools. They could have, right? They could have said, you know, the middle schools suck. That's the problem here, right? You fix the middle schools, the high school will get better. Right? No, they said we're going to meet the kids where they are. They had shared leadership. Sue Satchowitz contacted me 3 years ago when she retired. She said, Pedro, I want you to know I'm leaving, moving to St. Petersburg. You're not going to find me here anymore. I'd like to send people, they're not going to see me. I said, you worried? She said, not at all. I said, why not? She said, because the teachers own this, not me. And after she left, the school continued to make steady progress because the leadership was shared. They had a focus on buy-in, and it didn't come quickly or immediately. Not all teachers were ready to get on board. Not all teachers thought they should teach literacy. You had math teachers and science teachers said, no, I don't do literacy. I do math. I do science. PE teachers said, I definitely don't do literacy. Now they're all doing it. But it didn't happen overnight. It was a concerted effort. And when teachers are leading the effort, and it's coming from their colleagues, the response is different. They had a coherent strategy focused on student needs. They said, what do our kids need to know to be successful on this exam? Now, the truth is, at first, they tried to game the exam. They saw that on several of the earlier versions of the exam, there was a lot of Shakespeare. So they had kids reading Shakespeare in every class. Next exam came up, no Shakespeare. I said, damn, can't game the exam. We actually have to teach the kids well. They're ready for whatever comes. Right? But it was a strategy focused on building the literacy skills. That means reading, writing, presentation skills, analysis, the higher order thinking skills that we know are key for college preparation. That's what they focused on. They differentiated professional development. They provided support in content. And they realized some teachers are going to need a lot more help than others. And finally, they followed through. They stuck with it. They've been doing this now for 20 years. There were some wrinkles along the way when there's changes in leadership at the district level. But the teachers know what worked, so they're sticking with it. What's important about Brockton is the questions they were asking. They were clear. What are we teaching in our classes? How does it relate to what our students need to know and be prepared? How do we know they're learning it? Where's the evidence? You know, evidence-based teaching looks a whole lot different than faith-based teaching. You know, faith-based teaching, they say, I hope they got it. I hope they got it this time. Evidence-based teaching, you look at the work. How many of you have teachers analyzing student work on a regular basis? Connection between teaching and learning becomes real clear when you bring the work into the room. And it also becomes clear that some teachers get better work out of their kids than others. And that's an opportunity for learning. Why are they working and producing those essays for you and not me? I won't point at anybody else. They want to say, what do our students need to know on the MCAS? But not just for the state exam, but for college and their lives beyond school. Because equity is about not simply preparing them for an exam, it's about preparing them so they are independent thinkers and have good decision-making skills. That's why the social and emotional learning is so important. Third, what do we control and what don't we control? They knew they weren't going to get more resources. I got some here, I'm sorry. I got to just stop every now and then to drink. Thank you. So often I go to schools where they're focused on the things they don't control. Or saying, oh, you know, if we had lower class size, we'd be so much better. If we had new computers, we'd be so much better. If we had a new gym, you would see this school would really improve. I said, no, what do we have, and how do we use what we have to make more of a difference for our kids? Here's what the Boston Globe, well, I wish I had the quote there. The Boston Globe, the same Boston Globe, we called them a cesspool, later in 2009 cited them as a symbol of urban hope, a symbol for the rest of the state to learn from. Because Brockton High is no longer a school that people run away from. People want to get their kids into Brockton High. They didn't change who they serve, they changed how they serve them. Now, the good news is there are other districts that are doing this work too. Abington, Pennsylvania. People often ask me, is there a district where you see gaps in achievement closing, where a child's race and class don't predict outcomes? Well, go to Abington. Abington's right outside of Philadelphia. And it's diverse. And Amy Sickle, the superintendent, who also was Superintendent of the Year for 3 years in a row for the state of Pennsylvania, has been leader now 16 years. Abington is known as a place that produces leaders because they're regularly pulling assistant principals and principals from that district to become superintendents in other places because they know that they have a clear sense of how to create conditions for success. Every student at Abington High School is in a club or on a sport. You know why? All the research shows kids who are involved in music, in sports, in theater do better than kids who are not involved. That's a very consistent finding. Why? Because they are more connected to school, but also because they're getting discipline. They're getting the other skills, the non-cognitive skills, through those activities. They make sure at at Abington, that every student has an advisor. Because you know that one counselor to 200 or 300 or 400 kids is not counseling. It's scheduling. And that every student needs to have an adult they can turn to if they have a problem. So when we look at places like Abington, like Sanger, California, or Orlando, Florida, these are big places. I was just down in Orlando, and they have not only full-day preschool, universal preschool in the district, but they have comprehensive services at all the schools because they're serving poor kids. So they have to have a food pantry. And they have to have a doctor visiting on a regular basis because they know there are kids that haven't seen a doctor or a nurse and need to get eyes exams. How many of your kids who struggle in reading need eyeglasses? There are districts out there that know they can't wait for someone to help them. You know why they can't wait? Because no one will help them. And so great leaders are not waiting. They go and make it happen. They go out and they know the community. They're resourceful. And they build partnerships to address those other needs that kids have. Cherry Creek, Colorado, second largest district after Denver. They had an equity officer. And that person left. And I was contacted by the superintendent and said, could you recommend someone to be our chief equity officer? And I said to the superintendent, why don't you become the chief equity officer? He said, what do you mean? I said, people will take it seriously when they know it comes from you. He said, oh, good point. And then he announced the next day, I'm the chief equity officer. And everybody's going to be responsible because I'm going to make sure it shows up in your job description. And because of that, Cherry Creek is doing things that Denver can't even dream to do. And people don't realize Cherry Creek is diverse. It's got all kinds of challenges, just like other districts. It also has pockets of affluence, but they've got a clear vision. And the vision starts from the classroom, but it goes into operations at the school level, at the district level. They operationalize an equity agenda. They engage in collaborative problem solving from the district level. How many central office folks are here? Lots. A question I often ask the central office folks, when you show up at a school, are they happy to see you? They should be, right? Should be that folks from the central office are there to help. They're to problem solve, not there simply to scrutinize and tell them what's wrong. Again, that's the Toronto approach. That's the approach in Cherry Creek. And so there are real strategies that allow us to improve. And this is just data on Abington. But these strategies, I think, have not been sufficiently available to schools. Our state governments have, I think, got us focused on the wrong things. I know the former state superintendent here, Jack McLaughlin, was a friend. So I don't know the current one, but I knew Jack when he was superintendent in Berkeley. Jack had a vision for how to address these disparities and how to focus on the opportunity gaps. Jack, for example, understood homework as an equity issue. Something as basic as homework. How many of you have kids that you help with homework at home? Even when you're tired, even when you don't understand it. And how many of you know very well you have kids in your school that have no one to help them with homework, but teachers that are grading them based on the homework? They may not even have a place to get the work done. To simply ignore that need sets kids up to fail. Equity is not about lowering the bar, but it is about making the bar accessible. And so if we believe that homework is important, and I still believe it's important, although I don't believe kids should be learning new work at home, right? It should be a reinforcement of work they've already been exposed to, so it's not an exercise in frustration. Then we got to make sure that we make our high standards accessible, that there's a place to get the work done, that there's support, that if we can't use the internet, we use other means to make sure that our kids get the support they need and that our teachers get the support they need. And so part of what we've got to do is do less of what doesn't work and more of what does. Assigning the weakest teachers to work with the neediest kids doesn't work. I haven't seen any research to support that strategy yet. Sharing the responsibility does work. Making the classes smaller when you're serving high-need kids does work. AVID works. How many of you have AVID in your schools? All right, AVID. Those who don't should find out why they're saying, whoop. Because what does AVID do? AVID provides kids with tools they need to get clear on what it means to be successful. AVID demystifies learning for kids. Teaches them how to be organized, how to take responsibility. I would say schools that are doing AVID well realize, guess what? We can bring AVID to all our classrooms. Right? Those strategies benefit all kids, not just those we call AVID kids. And so we need to do more and more of what works. And examples like Brockton, and there are so many others, and we wrote this book, Excellence Through Equity, because we wanted to show that these examples are out there, that they exist. There are places right now, I work with a school, Social Justice Humanitas High School in Encino. It's a low-income school in LA, 100% Latino, surrounded by gangs, hasn't had a fight in over 7 years. They start the year with community building. Ninth graders do 3 days of it. All kids do at least a day. And I sat in as they were having kids talk about their lives and share their experiences and their interests, and teachers participate in these sessions with the kids. And I said, Jose, why do you have your school do this? He said, because when we build community, we created opportunity for these kids to feel safe and to know that this is a place where there are adults who care about them. He said, I have kids who come up and tell me things that I need to know that they would have never told me otherwise, because we have done this work. And what's so ironic about his school is that we have many schools in LA that are under-enrolled, losing kids to charter schools. His school has a waiting list. People are dying to get into his school. Why? Because they've created a culture where kids are known, and a culture that allows them to meet the needs of kids, even kids who come from very challenging circumstances. So I want you to really think about what capacity building looks like at your school level. How's it showing up? At the district level, it's got to be bringing resources into schools, support into school, using data as a resource to analyze where problems are and to problem solve with schools about how to tackle those. At the site level, it means engaging our teachers as partners in this work, analyzing student work with them, looking at the patterns, and talking about what needs to change to get better results for our kids. There are no quick fixes, and I know lots of schools have adopted teacher-proof curriculum, for example, that allow us to put anybody in the classroom and just follow the steps in the book and bore the kids to death. Here's what schools that are engaged in capacity building focus on. They focus on getting kids excited about learning. Think about the difference. How often have you run into kids at the end of the day where they say, wow, what a day. I had a great day today. Can't wait to come back. We learned so much. I was so inspired. That should happen sometimes, shouldn't it? What would happen if you told your teachers, stop focusing on achievement and start focusing on getting kids excited about learning. You know what they start to realize? That the path to higher achievement is through engagement. And engagement is not simply about whether or not they're present. It's multidimensional. It's behavioral, it's cognitive, and it's emotional. And when kids are engaged at all three levels, the classroom changes. Changes because kids are motivated. And because kids are on task, teachers can differentiate support to their students. And because kids are producing work in class rather than sitting and listening for long periods of time, we can actually see who's getting it and who's not. Who needs more support and more time. We can respond more quickly and more effectively to the learning needs. Focusing on engagement changes classrooms. I often point out to people it's also the best way to address classroom management. Because typically in classrooms where there's a problem with discipline, it's usually a reflection of the teaching going on too. And so if we shift the focus onto equity and onto engagement, we start to see that we can in fact begin to share responsibility for changing the outcomes. And again, the clearest evidence that this kind of approach works is in the schools themselves. And as I've said, I get a chance to travel around the country and visit many schools and classrooms. And I often get written to by principals and teachers and superintendents who want to tell me about the work they're doing. I also get letters from people who are struggling. And I know that out there's a lot of people still struggling. And over again, what I would say is that when we are focused on the work of creating the conditions that allow good teaching and learning to show up, even in some of our poorest communities, we can create schools that can change outcomes for kids. I was at a school like that in Brooklyn. I was invited over by the principal. This was a middle school in one of the parts of Brooklyn that still hasn't gentrified, area called East New York. I grew up not far from there, so I was curious when I heard they had a high-performing middle school there. When I first get there, they share the building on the ground floor with an elementary school, and a mom was dropping off her 5-year-old. And we have a security guard there checking people in, and the mom says to the security guard, "I'm late for work, I don't have time for this." And the guard looks at her and says, "Come here, sweetie," and calls the child over and says, "Go to work." And after the mom leaves, I turn to the guard. I said, isn't she supposed to sign her in? Yeah, she's supposed to sign her child in and then wait until the child's escorted to class. I said, "Well, why didn't you do that?" He said, "Because I could see she was stressed." So I said, "Go to work." So now I'm impressed already because the security guard is exercising leadership. I said, "This is unusual." So I walk up the stairs to get to the middle school, and I run into a little boy, and he's engaged in the slowest walk up a flight of stairs I've ever seen. I thought he had a broken leg. And I said, "What's wrong?" He said, "I'm tired." He eventually gets up to the top of the stairs. The principal sees him. What she says? She says, "I'm so happy you're here, but you're late. Get right to class and take off your hat. We'll talk about why you're late later." Then she says, "I want you to meet my assistant principal." And he's there involved in a discipline session with the little boy, except that when I get there, I can't tell it's discipline because it sounds like a praise session. He's telling him, "You're a leader in this school. Kids look up to you." Then I come and he starts telling me, this boy is a great writer. He's a leader. Other kids admire him, but he makes bad choices. And he's setting a bad example for others. He says, "Now I want you to go back to class. We're going to talk more about it." And then he explained to me that boy was being drawn into gangs. And he was trying to counter the gangs, but he knows that if he just pushes them away, he's going to lose that boy to gangs. So he's pulling him in. So I give you examples like these because when we see schools that are making a difference, when we see districts that are making a difference, what we see is the work looks different. They're not consumed with the technical work of education. which a lot is about compliance. They're concerned with the adaptive work, which forces us to reflect on what we're doing and ask tough questions. Are we making a difference? Have we created a culture that brings out the best in our staff, best in our kids? Are our kids engaged? Are they motivated? Are they inspired? Do our parents trust us? Are they willing to do their part? Asking the right questions is key to getting the right answers. I get a chance to see a lot. And for that reason, I am optimistic about the chances in education. I'm optimistic because I've lived it. In my own life, I'm optimistic because I see lots of educators across the country doing this work, not waiting for us to elect the right person before they get the work done. We can't wait. Our kids' time is right now. Our parents have trusted us to take on their kids. They've sent us the best kids, haven't they? They didn't save some for somebody else. Our challenge is to make sure they get the best opportunity they deserve. I wish you all the best. Thank you.